Isaac is originally from Los Angeles, and he's been at the Berkeley Global Jazz Institute only 1 year. He was studying at New England Conservatory. He did his undergraduate. And I think during this undergraduate, he started working on the seed of what you're going to see here today. I had the amazing pleasure to be his advisor during the year. But he was so clear and so focused on what he wanted to do, I really didn't feel I did anything but kind of having him talk a little bit about it. He was super organized and very, very much into his research. And his research is very interesting. He focused on a musician, composer that not many people know, and I'm gonna let him speak about. But it was a pleasure to have him this year at the Institute, and he's been incredibly busy in many other projects, and we really enjoy having Isaac here with us. Isaac Wilson.
Thanks, Marco, and thank you to all the panel for being here. I just want to start off by saying that this past year has been really incredible in the Global Jazz Institute. I don't think I could have been in an environment that could have given me any more inspiration or guidance at this point in my life where I felt like I needed it. So I just want to really thank Danilo and Marco and all of the visiting artists, all of the teachers, Alan, who I've had throughout this year, for really making this experience what I think is one of the best, if not the best, master's program available already, and it's in its first year. So big round of applause to everyone for that. For my study this year, I decided to focus on the composer Conlon Nancarrow, who was here's a picture of him right here. He was born in Arkansas in 1912, but moved to Mexico later in his life. He actually studied in Boston briefly here in the early 30s, studied with some pretty well-known composers, Roger Sessions, Walter Piston, and Nicholas Sloninsky. And I'm not exactly sure where he studied, but he was involved at various institutions, probably. While in Boston, he joined the Communist Party and decided to go fight in the Spanish Civil War, opposing General Franco in a group called the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, which was some American soldiers who wanted to go overseas and fight for what they believed was right. And upon coming back to the United States, they wouldn't give him his passport. So he didn't feel very at home here and decided to move to Mexico, which in 1940 he did. And then 15 years later, he became a Mexican citizen, only coming back a few times later in life when he finally received recognition for his amazing composition and contribution to 20th century music. He was discovered by Ligeti in the 80s, and a lot of more people found out about him. A lot of people still don't know about him very much, though. So the goals of my experience were to explore these elements that were in his studies for player piano, which is a series of, I believe, 62 pieces, 49 etudes, but they have multiple parts, that he wrote for the player piano between 1948 and 1992. They're not numbered in order that they were composed. But I want to talk a little bit about player pianos, because I think some of you, if not most of you, probably have heard of them or know what they are, but maybe some of you haven't. So this is what it looks like on the left of your screen. It's a he actually had his own modified player piano with thumbtacks that would create a much more percussive sound. But it's an instrument that you would put a scroll of paper that had punches in, and as the machine played it, the hammers would respond due to a very elaborate mechanism, and the piano would play as if someone were playing it. And on the right of your screen is what the actual piano roll looked like. This is for study number 49C. You see it has kind of a visually appealing appearance. Kind of looks like it could be a work of art in a lot of ways, but there's an amazing sound behind every one of these rolls. And sometimes he would punch directly into the roll. He wouldn't always notate before, so he would kind of have these sounds in his head, and he would punch directly into the roll using this device that he created or had built for him in his home in Mexico City, or just outside Mexico City. And he didn't really have musicians to play with. He lived in isolation relatively for most of his life and crafted these amazing rolls in his workshop for years. So my process was to listen to all of these player piano etudes. I have a box set on my computer, and I went through, cataloged all of them, did lots of listening, passive listening and active listening, just really allowing these pieces to sink into my subconscious. And I think that process is really, really important whenever you're trying to internalize the language of somebody, be it Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, Bud Powell, Herbie Hancock, or Schoenberg or Conlon Nancarrow. There's this process that you have to give time of allowing the music to seep in. I was first exposed to the music back at New England Conservatory in 2013 at a master class with Jason Moran, who was one of my teachers and mentors there. And it really struck my ear. I didn't really know what it was. And have given it time these past 3 years to really sink into my musical DNA, to the point where I felt like before I began this really rigorous study of the music, people would tell me that, when they would hear this music, when I would show it to them, they'd be like, you kind of sound like this in a weird way. Like, I kind of hear like this is creeping into your music already. So this process of listening, giving it time, and then formal transcription of the music, and then sending it to the band members who I was going to choose, generating more concrete arrangements with the band after that. And the arrangements that we created were really a group process. I transcribed and I had some ideas about the different directions I wanted to take this music, but I didn't necessarily tell them exactly what to play. We kind of generated this as a group. So here are the musicians I used on my project. Max Ridley on the bass, who's actually going to be coming to the master's program next year, and Dora Herskovitz on drums and percussion. Anthony Fung was the producer, and Adam Weiss at Mix One Studios was the engineer. Here's the first piece. Let's get to hearing some of this music. I'm going to play you the original, which was recorded in 1991 at his home on his modified player piano. This is study number 3B, which is a 12-bar blues. And it was part of his Boogie Woogie suite, which he was very influenced by boogie woogie pianists, stride pianists. He loved Art Tatum, James P. Johnson, Earl Hines, Albert Ammons. And he wanted to, have these sounds in his music. So this was composed in 1948. It's one of the first pieces he wrote for player piano. Oops. we turn up the volume a little bit, please? Thank you. All right, now here is I'm going to play you a little bit of my version of the piece. And this we treated pretty close to how it was recorded. We didn't do anything crazy with the form or the arrangement. We just wanted to play it and explore the connections to the blues, which is a very familiar form to us jazz musicians. Skip to some of the improvisation. All right, looks like we have to move on. Thank you. The bass also cut out. I don't know why the bass cut out. The next one I'm going to talk about is study number 10 for player piano, which he composed a little bit later in 1960. And in this piece, I really saw the connection to the 12/8 rhythms that we have talked about all year in the Global Jazz Institute. Danilo is one of the first exercises he teaches is the kind of learning to speak over the bembe bell pattern, which goes like. There's speaking going on all the time. So learning to hear that connection to the bembe, which I feel like all the greatest jazz musicians and blues musicians kind of have this connection to the feeling of walking and talking over that rhythmic grounding at the same time. So in this piece, there's 12/8, which is something that is all over Nancarrow's music. It's he really explores that, and so does Ligeti and a lot of other composers. But we heard this and couldn't really figure out as a group, and I was even asking these guys for help because it's so hard to figure out what's going on in this music sometimes. But we heard this, and we just kind of understood the concept of downbeats in this 12/8. So like on the quarter note, or on the dotted quarter note, and then offbeat triplets alternating, which you'll hear a little bit in the original. There's an intro, but I'll skip from the intro. So there's this kind of stilted, kind of very awkward feeling from the music that comes from this shifting time signatures, upbeats and downbeats. And then you hear in what's happening melodically, kind of sounds like speech rhythms or somebody talking. The melodic contours don't really follow a predictable pattern or anything that we've heard. That's why I saw some of you having funny reactions to this music. I still do. I still am sit down and I just end up listening for hours instead of trying to accomplish anything because the music is so kind of foreign still. It's so different from what we're used to. But there's this feeling of upbeats and downbeats. And here we see there's a cycle of chords that transposes, that I transcribed. And as a band, we decided to apply this concept of upbeats and downbeats to the chord sequence. So it's the same sequence, A, B, C, and D. They're just transposed by minor thirds. So we have four downbeats, 4 upbeats, 3 downbeats, 3 upbeats, and then we kind of shuffle it around for the next section. We didn't even write this out when we came up with it. It was just kind of on the spot. And I think it would have confused us more if we had tried to write it out. So I'll play you what we did with it, and this includes the intro that I played, that I transcribed. His music is also very kinetic. There's this feeling of sometimes of like a machine or like in this piece, it's kind of like a feeling of a bouncing ball that, you know, as it gets lower to the ground, bounces faster and faster. Really feeling of motion in the music. And then from the original piece, we extracted a melodic fragment and created a vamp. It's based on a bell pattern in 5 or 15/8. form of the hits over the solo section. I'm kind of trying to talk over it. So that's the premise of the piece. Thank you. I'm just going to play you 10 seconds of some of the other pieces that we did. This is a piece of, it's often called the flamenco study, although he denied that it had anything to do with that. This is an intro that I transcribed. Let's see. One more that I did. I'll just play you a little bit. This is a piece that was based on clusters that he wrote, dedicated to the composer György Ligeti, and we just wanted to play this one straight down. We transcribed the concept. We couldn't transcribe all the notes from the recording, but we just wanted to kind of get the concept of the piece and use these. Use the concept to kind of play through it and arrange it a little bit in terms of the range of the instruments. So it starts off like this. Nancarrow's music is very connected to, I think the player piano is the earliest example of kind of computer music or electronic music. It came way before that, you know, even at the beginning of the century there were player pianos. And I think that Nancarrow, I don't know if he was directly influential in the development of electronic and tape music later, but I definitely hear this aesthetic that connects to a lot of the music that I love today, that's made electronically using samples and loops. So this piece grows. And continues to grow. Thank you. Additionally, one thing I wanted to do was just play some standards, which is something I love to do, standards from the Great American Songbook, and try to get into some of this language, which is seeped in subconsciously and consciously to all of our playing in the trio, and just kind of wanted to explore what what would happen in the studio if we just did one take of a standard, trying to get inside Conlon Nancarrow's head. Thank you.
Isaac Wilson. Isaac Wilson.
Thanks.
Alan, you would like to go first?
Yeah, this is amazing, really original, really interesting, really a great example of how to dig really deeply into an inspiration and to find a way to make it part of your own music. I really appreciate the way that you went through your process and shared it with us, because I think, if I can editorialize a little bit here, that one of our biggest problems in our lives in civilization these days is lack of time and attention to whole pieces of music and really focused listening. I see evidence of it absolutely constantly as a teacher and musician, and I see it in my own life, how hard it is to break away from technology and information and listen to music all the way through carefully with full attention, passively and actively, as you said. It's really important that you shared that is why it changed your playing, that you listened a lot. Yeah. As well as very rigorous transcription and work with your group and so on. The results are amazing. What I want to say is that, first of all, I strongly encourage you to share this, like put it out at the top level. You know, this needs to be heard. I would say this about really most of the projects, maybe all of the projects that I'm hearing here. But this, you know, this should be listened to by everybody and reviewed in magazines and things like that.
Thank you, that means a lot.
It does. And the standards are really part of it. I mean, it's really interesting to hear the two things next to each other. Also, when you do a project like this that's inspired by somebody and there's a story behind it, it gives journalists something to write about. That's a little cynical to say, but it's true. Tribute projects are record labels. When they existed, you know, we're always trying to get people to do tribute projects because you could get press. We're just writing about, here's a guy from LA who plays really interesting piano. It's not a headline, you know, where rediscovering this composer is more of a headline or a lead. So that's helpful. But the challenge, I think, for you, and I know this is a challenge for me because I was deeply immersed in the Weirdos' music too, Sun Ra, you know, and Nancarrow is somebody I've been aware of for 40 years, but he's still obscure and he's very, it's very strange and very amazing, his obsession and what he created. I went to an exhibit once of Joseph Cornell's visual art, this guy who made, I think that's the name, he made hundreds of little boxes with strange things in them with glass on the front. And that was all he did, you know, or almost all he did his whole life. And it was in a major art museum. And you think like, God, this guy spent his whole life putting these things in these boxes or making music for a player piano in Mexico City that nobody heard, you know, for decades, hardly. And yet he was one of the great 20th century composers, one of the most imaginative. So my point where I'm going with this is you can go deeply into this and you're passionate about absorbing it and sharing it, but there's also the possibility that you become the next Conlon Nancarrow.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What is your music now that you've learned from people as he learned from great people like Roger Sessions or Nicholas Slimsky, who are wildly imaginative composers too? What, you know, maybe you'll have a music that grows out of this and your other influences and is just as much a life's work as his.
Yeah, I hope so.
And I wonder if you have thought about that, because that's a big ambition, but I think you could take it on, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing process, but I feel like this is the beginning of my study of this music, and then where that's going to take me in terms of what kind of shoot-off projects or compositional off-spins from this is, you know, it remains to be seen. But I feel like I'm just kind of getting my feet wet with this music.
Yeah, Isaac, wow. I think my comment while I was listening to it, the thing that kept on resonating to me in your music is when, you know, I've been hearing in our session, you've been playing this music for me, and I always like the kind of weird, and juggler, way of the way this music sounds. But I was wondering, how would you translate that in your piano? And when I'm listening, it's like we're listening to a player piano that is very mechanic, and you were able to kind of really make this music human in a way that you don't have that impression when you hear this.
Oh,
And,
thank you.
And I think that by adding this humanity, this music really comes to life. I would love to know if he would have had the chance to hear this, what he would have thought about it.
I'm definitely going to send it to his family, and they have ways of getting in touch with him on his website. So,
But what I'm going at is that even if I would not know anything about the composer or his piano, this music speaks of you at the end. To me, this is a great accomplishment. The way you kind of, like you said, you spend all this time listening, and it kind of is like you said, is in your DNA, and it comes out this way. And he spoke to me in a way that is, I really felt a lot of. It ceases to be only weird, and interesting in a weird way. It really got you were able to give a soul that is, to me, is very special. And my question to you is, I know you spent so much time on it, but how were you able to translate these sounds and talk to your friends in a way that worked this well? I mean, what was the process? I'm very interested in the way that you approach this with the group.
In a way, I don't think it's different from any other process of finding music that resonates with you. I know when I heard it, I didn't understand it, but there was something deep in the way that the emotional response that I had to the music connected with this kind of intellectual curiosity that I had for it. And I think it's really this process. One of my mentors, Rand Blake, who taught at New England Conservatory and is an amazing pianist, always talks about this process of how we let music seep into our DNA, and that process takes time, but it also takes really trying to zero in on what you like in the music. So with this music, there were little fragments. Maybe it was like a 2-3 second fragment that I would hear, and it wasn't just in these studios. It was in any of the 63 different pieces that I would kind of. They just kind of start. I think I would start hearing them in my sleep or something. Kind of like walking around. You start hearing this little melodic turn or this little rhythmic rub that's created. These little moments, and I think the longer you live with a piece of music, you start to collect more and more of these little moments. And for me, in this music, that I collected a lot of those. And then in the end, it's not the actual moments that end up coming out in the music. It's the kind of the aggregate feeling, the aggregate kind of aesthetic that's expressed through all of those moments together. So for me,
I guess my question was, how do you communicate this to your musicians in a way that they could really resonate with you?
They were they were pretty bewildered at first, I would say, when I showed them this music. They were very open-minded musicians, so I trusted them fully with it. But I think that they were feeling the same way I was in a lot of ways. It was kind of like being a little kid looking at this music, not knowing what it is, and then we would play along to the recordings. I actually sent the recordings to the drummer, Dor, and he would send me recordings of him playing back along with these tracks, and they were amazing. I almost wanted to use that for my project because I thought it would be so fun to be a drummer playing along with all these rhythmic dances and intricacies that were happening. And then the bassist said to me that he didn't really know what his role, he didn't hear how the bass was fitting into this music. And I told him that was exactly the reason I had him there, which was that I I wanted to see what this music would be like with bass, because it's really percussive with the addition of the thumbtacks on the hammers. It's very percussive music. So I wanted these guys, and their personality really gels with mine. I think the things that I resonated with in the music were often very similar with what resonated with them. So in the studio, we're just kind of like trying to get in this headspace. We kept calling it "getting Nanky with it." That was the phrase. We just let's get Nanky with it, over and over again. And so it was just like all of us kind of going off into the unknown together.
Wonderful. I agree with Alan. This should be really, this music should go out. It's
Thank you.
wonderful.
That means a lot.
Beautiful, Isaac. Beautiful.
Appreciate it.
Okay, Isaac Wilson.
All right.
Wonderful.